Well, hey, welcome to Connecting Things, Costa Mesa. If you didn't know yet, we actually have a couple different branches. We have a branch that started in Colorado Springs and then another one in good old Kentucky. And yeah, so we are about getting together creatives, entrepreneurs, illustrators, designers, people that do stuff in their local area and not feeling like you always have to be in New York or LA. No, LA's but yeah, so this is, Orange County has amazing talent pool of really cool people doing good things. So glad you're here. Tonight's panel is going to be an amazing group. We have Mark Hamian, we have Eva Ho, and Mark Everett. Two Marks. Don't know how we're going to do that one. But and our good old Jason Lenko, who is going to be moderating. And on to the show.
Okay, so I think this is a good topic for this community, especially I think in this audience we have a good mix of independent creatives and also entrepreneurs who are trying to grow their businesses. And I think especially because everyone sees the headlines and stories of companies like Airbnb and Uber and so forth, I think a lot of entrepreneurs sometimes get it in their head that they need to raise capital in order to be a successful business. Can you talk about which types of specific companies you feel like should look for capital and which types of companies maybe should not look for capital?
So before we start, can we get a show of hands on how many people are entrepreneurs out there or consider themselves entrepreneurs?
Oh, wow. Awesome.
That's great. And so how many of you have startups at one stage of development or another? All right.
Cow.
How many of you are actively raising money or think you should be or are curious whether you should be? All right. Thank you. No, I think the challenge with venture capital, and my friends laugh at me because they say you're the worst VC because you tell people not to raise VC, but it's probably the most expensive form of finance for a business if you really think about a successful business. And you can argue whether the VCs help the entrepreneurs achieve, a big public offering or a sell to Microsoft or some big company. But the reality is, certain types of businesses, venture capital is probably the only type of finance available. You're early in the stage, you have a very compelling product into a big market, you don't yet have revenue, you can't do traditional bank finance, so the capital has to come from somewhere before you start sort of taking orders. That's where venture capital fits. There's a lot of businesses that aren't in that mode. In fact, I would argue that probably 99% of them aren't going to fit for venture capital. But the ones that do fit, it can help if you have the right partners and it's sort of done correctly. But don't believe everything you read. There's a lot of luck involved. But in terms of whether your business is, it would depend on what type of business you're doing, and we can get into more of that in a little bit.
Yeah, I think you covered it well. I think when you're starting out, you have to be pretty creative on where you get money. And venture is just one possible source. Now there's small business loans, there's crowdfunding, there's lots of different things. And I would say consider getting venture if you truly believe you're going to build a company that's in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And I know that sounds really silly when you're just sitting there and you're like, I just have an idea on a napkin or I have a slide deck of 10 slides. Like, this isn't going to be $1 billion. But that's what the VCs are looking for, because for us to do our job and to drive the returns for the people that we manage money for, we have a specific return profile that we're looking for. And unfortunately, a lot of the businesses don't fall into that. It doesn't mean it's not an incredible idea, but often I help coach folks on how else to get capital in other ways if venture's not exactly where they're at right now.
I'm not a VC. I'm the token startup person who's raised a VC. Mark's actually, full disclosure, one of our investors in Design Inc. He's great. He only shows up 3 times a week, and eats our food, and we love it.
It's a free lunch.
Yeah, well, not really. You paid for it, so it's great. So it's always interesting because you hear this idea of like, well, it's got to be this mass. Your idea has to be quite large. What's the dichotomy for an entrepreneur is if you think about, how am I going to be $1 billion? You can't do anything. You can't move. You can't figure out what's step one. So you play in these two sides of your mind where it is a big burden to raise money and have, that accountability to someone. On the other hand, you should believe in the thing you want to do so much that you're going to do it regardless of whether you raise or not. And the advice I like to give folks on the other side of the table is they're really lucky to have you. That's how you got to approach it, because they have to go and talk to a lot of folks to find the one or two folks that they're going to invest in. And hopefully, that's how I looked at it, at least. Mark is lucky to have us. But we're quite lucky to have him too, though, by the way. But I will say, I don't know if we're going to get into decks and how to pitch and all that fun stuff, but anyway, we can get there.
We'll get to some of that.
Yeah.
So if you do feel like you have a business that is going to take off like a rocket ship, and you have done some research and okay, we have a strong enough technology play or a strong enough angle that we fit this VC profile and we want to go raise our seed round or angel round. What do you think is the first thing an entrepreneur should do when they go, okay, I've got my mind made up, I'm going to go start raising capital? What do you think is the most essential pre-work that an entrepreneur can do?
I would say doing research on both angels as well as VCs, and know the profile of each of those different firms, if you want to call it. They all look for different things. The good thing is most VCs are pretty public. So I feel very lucky. I think both Mark and I think there's some VCs that went straight into being a VC from a finance role, but both of us operated at companies before. So we've been on sort of your side of the table where we've been asking for money. In some ways, we're hopefully a bit more empathetic to you when you're coming to ask for money. But I'd say really just make sure you know who you're talking to. So I look for different things than Mark does. So I'm earlier stage than Mark. My check sizes are like 350 to 750, and sub 10 million in valuation. That's sort of, and then I have specific sectors that I look for. And then Mark looks for something different. So when you're going and if you're lucky enough to actually sit across from a VC, which is actually quite a hard step because you have to go through like a warm referral. There's several steps before you're actually sitting across. If you're sitting across and you get that chance, make sure you look at their profile, their portfolio, what they like, all that stuff. Go to YouTube and see if they've spoken anything before. Really take advantage of that chance. And when I'm always impressed when they sit down and say, they're like, "Oh, Eva, you like education, I see, because you did X, Y, Z." I'm like, "Oh, thank you for doing the research." And suddenly I'm a lot warmer to the conversation.
Yeah, I think one of it, and I didn't appreciate this when I launched the fund 10, 11 years ago, but there was this sort of adage, thou shalt come by way of referral. And it made no sense to me. I said, look, I've been on that side. I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to meet with everybody. And then I remember there's 24 hours in the day, and not all those hours are mine in terms of determining what I get to do at any given point in time. And so I said, well, got to be a filtering mechanism. Just to give you an example, and so we're a small fund. We've got 50, 60 million under management between the funds at this point. We get probably 500-600 emails a day, 20, 30 voicemail messages. I don't know how many texts from some people that like to text funny emoji a lot, but I can't respond to them all. In addition to actually just responding to the inbound, I'm out there looking for types of companies, types of industries, attending a school play for my kids, those kinds of things, life as it happens around you. And so you end up developing this filtering mechanism where, another fellow investor that you've worked with before or one of your portfolio company CEOs introduces you to someone, those are the meetings you end up taking. Well, after you do this for a while, a lot of VCs. You've got 20, 30, 40, 50 portfolio companies over these funds, and so their founders are making introductions to you constantly. And I don't want to be discouraging because it's really bad, but the reality is it's best to come by way of referral because then you sort of cut through, and I get back to people. I carve out time to reply to emails, but it may be a long time before I get to that email. And I tell people on my voicemail, I'm like, I'm not going to listen to this, so either send me a text or send me an email, and yet they still leave multiple voice messages. Just, follow the instructions, I guess.
Yeah, I think I can add, piggybacking on what you shared, that was one of the best pieces of advice I had when we went through our own fundraising process was on the tail end of doing some of that research on the funds you actually want to work with or raise capital from, to also seek out CEOs and founders of companies in that portfolio and go ask them for advice, and also ask them their experience of working with that fund, because they may look on their website like somebody you want to work with, and they may say all the right things, but hearing an entrepreneur's experience of working with that fund can be incredibly valuable. And that's actually how I met Mark. An entrepreneur introduced me to him, and I think we just decided to just be friends, but it was,
It's a long life. You never know.
Okay, can I add one thing? All of our investors for Design Inc., I think we have about 7 of them. Every single one of them I've known for 5 years or more. I met through either informally or I worked with them. One of my investors, I worked with him at YouTube. He's now at Spotify, and he wrote a small check, but it was really gracious of him. Another gentleman was another person I met at Google, and I think I've taken Mark like 3 bad ideas before this one. But we've kept in touch over the years, and he always, and I don't know, maybe there was something. We would talk about surfing, we talk about our families, we talk about other things. It wasn't always about, hey, I got this thing, we should invest in it. And like we did take money from 500 startups, and the only reason that came about is because I went to a talk in San Diego, and at the end of the talk, Dave McClure's like, I need a ride to the airport. And I'm like, okay, the airport's not bad, why don't you just take a cab? It's like, no, I got to go to LAX. I was like, all right, well, hop in. And I drove him to LAX. And so I had him in the car for 2 hours. And, but I didn't do it for the purpose of, that was years ago. And we talked about everything but tech. It was neat. And we became friends. And, I don't know. I think that people want to invest in folks that they have a shared value system in, or that maybe they see something inside of you that they see inside themselves. And it's really, really hard to convey that in a 30-minute pitch where you're like all like this and you're like freaking out, and that's not the human side of you. The other side of it, of raising, is I went to people that I thought for sure would give me a check, and they said no. It was like the most brutal heart. Like, it makes you feel like you're worthless because you're like, what's wrong with me? Is it me? And they're like, yeah, it's you. I'm not investing in you. And so that's terrible.
So that actually goes nicely into the next question on the list. So good job predicting the next question. So you mentioned you brought a few bad ideas to Mark, and you have some prior experience with other startups before your current one. What are some of the things that you feel like led to, either the success or the downfall of previous startups, or both?
Yeah, I think all the downfalls, and there have been many. No, well, I'll tell you the only reason I think I got investment now is because this company that we're building right now is about design. It's about software design. It's about everything I've done. I've been a designer for 20 years. Like, this is going to sound very Trump-like, and I'm sorry. Don't take it that way. I'm not going to say bad things. But there's literally probably only 50 or 60 designers, maybe even less, that could build a company like what we're building right now, because it is a marketplace. So half that marketplace you have to be able to recruit designers to be on this platform. And I don't know that if you were a designer right out of school, I think it'd be really hard for you to do. So that was one element of why this investment kind of came through. The other side of it was I have worked in tech long enough to have relationships with enough startups and enough of a network to get the other side of the marketplace. That was enough to convince the investors to give me a seed round. We're just making a bet right now. We've just emerged. We just launched a few weeks ago. We're just seeing transactions. So now in my brain, I have from now till probably about March to prove something to this guy, to get the numbers where they need to be so that we can keep raising money and keep going. And so every past startup that we had, I don't want to take too much time, but all the past ideas didn't have I didn't have all those things coming together. I didn't have a particular domain knowledge on it. It was too much of a guess on the audience growth. It was not quite, anyway, you can share maybe what the other.
Do you remember how fast I said yes once you pitched your latest idea?
I don't.
So he sent me a text. I think it was kids ski week or something. So I got the text, And I actually, which is rare for me.
VC life's so hard.
It is absolutely horrendous. So I stopped in the middle of the run and, got ran over by a herd of kids and looked at it and just wrote N. And so as soon as I sort of saw the paragraph thesis, I knew this is exactly what he was meant to do. I mean, he pitched me a few eyes before that, and it was, this was the one, so it was really simple. But to his point, we've known each other for years. We talked about a lot of things, industry, family, technology, surfing, all kinds of stuff. So it was easy for me to know him well enough to know that him doing this with the right backing is as good a shot as any.
Awesome. Eva, you mentioned that you frequently give people advice even on other ways to raise capital. What are some of those alternate forms of funding and that you frequently recommend to people who might have the great idea, like you said, but not necessarily believe that it can be a billion-dollar company?
Yeah. I think getting some money from friends and family is usually it's actually not easy. That's not true. Is one way. So if you're looking to raise, say, just a couple $100,000 to get stuff going, I would say going to friends, professors, just in your community is really good. There's also small business loans that now are much more friendly to a lot of young companies. So I think that's another route. Crowdfunding like Indiegogo, Kickstarter, those are also other routes. So there's just a lot, and then there are a lot more now social impact enterprises where you have to be a bit creative from a financial engineering perspective, where you could have half the money come from a foundation or some other sort of nonprofit kind of donor base, and then the other half come from a VC. So there are B Corps, there's lots of other varietals of companies. But if you're just trying to get started and literally you'll need a couple $100,000, I wouldn't even pitch to VC. It's a waste of time. I would just try to go within that network or get a small loan.
What about full-time job funding? Yeah, getting a full-time job and then using that to fund your startup.
Yeah, not a bad idea at all.
Just need a little bit of Mountain Dew.
Steal a little bit of that yerba mate.
So you mentioned that you have to generate a return for your own investors, and that's a side of your job that not everyone really sees, but who do you actually work for?
Yeah, it's a super great question. It feels like a mystery. It's kind of still a mystery to me, honestly, because this is only my second fund. But we have bosses. So as you pitch to us, the cycle is full circle. We have to pitch to someone else. And so when Mark and I are raising our fund, we're literally going to family members, all the way to endowments, to various folks, so institutions, universities. So we're always asking for money, and those guys want a certain type of return. So typically for a fund, for us to stay alive and to get money for another fund, it's about a 3x return. And not to go into like really numbers or anything, what that means is if you're coming to us and you're asking for some amount of money and you have a valuation, say the valuation you're asking for is like $3 million, basically roundabout, you will have to be able to exit that company 3x or more for it to be sort of a worthwhile venture. So it doesn't always have to be $1 billion. And you take away some of the other costs. And Mark is actually much better at this than I am. But that's sort of the roundabout way of thinking about it. 3x or more for a fund for it to make sense for us.
You told me 40x, Mark.
The correct answer is it depends on the fund. So it's the complex math is the size of the fund. There's certain exits that make sense. If the fund is managing $1 billion, it needs to have a bunch of Ubers to be able to return $3 billion to its limited partners or investors. If it's managing a $10 million fund, it doesn't have to necessarily have those biggest companies. It can do well with smaller companies. The challenge is people seem to forget to look at the data. If you look at the recent data at Thomson Reuters, National Venture Capital Association, PwC, CB Insights, any of the data sources, the typical exit of a venture-backed startup company is sub 50 million, which tells you that, as a VC, if you're going to make money in those types of situations, you've got to go early when the valuation is low, make sure that they are capital efficient, and that you can return a multiple on that. Because as limited partners, to Eva's point, our investors, whether they're an endowment, a foundation, public company, or a large family office, they're going, do I put that $1 million in the stock market? Do I put it into real estate? Where do I put it? The bigger they are, the more asset allocation they have, where they may have a mandate to put it in venture capital. Family offices put it wherever they want, so they like to hear an interesting story. But they're looking for, if they give me $1, they want $3 back in less than 10 years. So that's net of everything. So you can think about the types of returns you have to generate. And, you think about this intellectually, but until you do, you don't realize it. Turns out not all the investments work. Maybe it's 1 or 2 in 10, and then a couple do okay, and the rest of them are complete goose egg. And so those ones have to really make up for all of the losses. There's sort of a power law in venture capital where you're going to have sort of a fund maker where now it's a 15, 20x, 40x, and you got a bunch that were absolute zeros, and then overall it ends up normalized where your annualized returns are 30, 40, 50% a year, and that's what they're looking for, which obviously is very hard to do.
Cool. So if you're, like, for you, Mark, outside of your bromance with the other Mark with a C, what would be another factor?
It is the best food place, by the way.
The best, what'd he say?
I can only imagine the conversation
Food places.
about we have this, we're Mark with a C. But do you,
It's the French way,
you have this, or you sent him a text though, with other people, or other entrepreneurs you've invested in, what are the main factors that have led you to say yes?
It's a long answer, but I've been asked that question before. So the way I've always summarized it are sort of the 3 Ps. It's passion, persistence, and perspective. And everything falls into one of those categories. But at the end of the day, what we're looking for is an individual that has the right background, going after the right market opportunity, and is absolutely obsessed with seeing this because it's really hard and you need a lot of luck and you're going to have to overcome a lot of obstacles to succeed. And you've got to have the perspective on know when to step on the gas or know when to take a day off and go surf, because it's not a sprint. These things tend to be from the time the VCs write their checks until there is a material liquidity event, 8 to 9 years. Some cases are longer. There's companies that are going public or have gone public in the last couple of years that got their first venture capital check 15 years ago.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think he encapsulated quite well. I think the one other thing is really the best folks who get money are the folks who are really good storytellers. So I think most of the time I'm just trying to understand your story and why you want to solve this very particular problem. The turnoffs are, for me, actually a lot of folks who are coming out of MBA, and I felt like they did some sort of matrix and they picked something that's up and to the right. It just feels unauthentic. But if you come to me and say you're pitching, say, an elderly home care service or platform, it would be nice if you said, I'm doing this because, I had grandparents, we went through this really hard process, I watched my parents go through it, and we felt the pain ourselves, and I really want to solve it because it's meaningful to me. Because, like Mark said, this is a long journey. And I also get turned off when you talk about exits too early. So if for a seed investor, I don't want to see any exit talk, speak in your slides at all, because there's no way neither you nor I know where the hell this thing is going to go. So let's not focus on IPO or blah, blah. I don't care about that at all. But the story that you tell me has to feel authentic. So that's one thing.
That's awesome. Mark and Eva, since you also are on that side with your own bosses, so to speak, do you have anything even just psychologically that you've learned in terms of resilience or making it through that no after no to keep going?
Yeah, it's honestly normal for 99.9% of the folks out there who go ask for money. My first company, Applied Semantics, we couldn't raise money. We raised a total of $5 million, and the investors treated us like crap. I was quite young back then, and we ended up selling the company for $1 billion. So you don't have to often listen to what others are telling you if you just have ways of getting through it. And we did it in the late 90s when there was a massive total market crash. Now as an investor, honestly, being a woman, for the women out there, there's only 6% of me, VCs, and when I go to LPs to get money, they say no to me all the time. Mark and I was actually talking about this because we're both raising a new fund, and I think I get 4 no's to 1 yeses. And it's okay. Like, I'm okay with it, because whatever reasons they're giving me, like, you're a first fund, you're unproven X, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, thanks. And you move on, because I don't even feel like it's their loss so much, like, it's just not a good match right now. And someday I'll earn my way to the table again, and they'll hopefully change their mind. But it's not personal. That's like the critical thing to remember, so.
Awesome.
The easiest way to sort of describe it, and you have to figure this out, is it's a bit of a numbers game. So if there's any hockey fans out there, it's shots on goal. I mean, it could be soccer or anything else for that matter, but you need to have shots on goal. But I'm a big believer in conversion ratios, and so I always took a more pragmatic approach, which was, ask everyone I knew and then some for referrals to find the information on who would be the best fit as an investor and why. And then I went after them. And so my conversion rate was extremely high, but it meant I had to do a lot more work up front in terms of, introductory meetings. What about this? Who's interested in Southern California or early stage, or, where does this background play in terms of a narrative or story? But the conversion rate was much higher. But you have to be prepared to deal with objection. And at the end of the day, raising funds is effectively a sales position. You're selling the story of what you're going to do, and whether that's a fund to go invest in other companies or actually a company, you've got to be able to explain what you're doing and why you're uniquely qualified to go and do that and get them bought in. You have to get them emotionally committed to what you're about to go do before you get them financially committed. And if you can get them emotionally committed in one meeting, God bless you, but usually it takes several meetings. They want to get to know you as a person. And then once they're bought in and they're helping and they start coming up with ideas and, hey, have you talked to this person? What about this? You know what you could do? Then you can see the light sort of switch, and all of a sudden now they're in your camp. Then you start talking about the fundraising, and, it tends to progress pretty quickly at that point. And I've only done this now for, going on the third fund. And so I have an N of 3, not a lot, but it's worked the same way every time.
Cool. So, you were just talking a little bit about the story, and just for some practical advice for anyone who's actually putting together a deck, assuming they're passionate and have the other attributes you talked about. I remember hearing a lot of conflicting advice on the order of the deck, including it doesn't even matter, but then some people saying you absolutely need to lead with this. Do you feel like there's a specific order of information that matters, or any just absolutely essential ingredients to include in that story, in the pitch deck? Mark?
Absolutely. The earlier you are, the more it's about the people than anything else. You tend to have a lot of hand waving and fancy PowerPoint slides, and less about, here's the actual product and you can see it on the shelves at your local Best Buy or Apple store. It's a very different story. And so, getting bought into the person and what their background is, as an individual, and then even more importantly, that they have a lot of other smart people with the right backgrounds that they've convinced to join them and have at least the core nucleus of a team to go and solve this big problem and create this, compelling product in this big market is absolutely critical. I think the strategy insofar is, look, here's what we know about the market. Here's the pain point we see. Here's how we think we're going to track it. We know where we're not going to be right 100%. We're open to suggestions. We've got enough flexibility built into our financial model that we're going to have some hiccups. We're going to make some adjustments. We know that. The VCs know that intuitively. So coming in thinking that it's automatically going to be a certain way as opposed to this is sort of a meandering journey, I think can be a mistake. And then finally, sort of a receptivity, because this is a financial partnership. One, show that you've done the homework, that you're with an investor that, fits, and it's going to be a collaborative effort. Because at the end of the day, whether you believe everything you read on the blogs, venture capitalists provide only 3 things. It's investment, it's insight, if you're lucky, and intros, if you're lucky. That's it, right? We like to talk about we add a lot of value, and those insights and intros, if you pick the right partner, far outweigh the investment. And if you haven't, if you don't look back, however many years from now and go, oh yeah, they also wrote us a check, then you've probably picked the wrong partner.
Yeah, that's really great, Mark. Just a couple of quick things. I think often I would go through the deck, and the decks, if I'm opening it, tend to come from somebody I already know who might have already invested and want me to be part of the round. So usually I'm already paying attention, but often I would go through the deck and I still don't know what your product or service is. That's half the battle. Either because it's just too fluffy or whatnot. So I think explaining as clearly as you can what you're trying to build. And the balance always is showing that you are pragmatic, and in the deck somehow you understand like the basics of unit economics and stuff. And at the same time balancing it with being able to tell a far-reaching story of why this is going to change the world. And that's the hard part of how do you do that in 12 slides or 10 slides. I think very few people do it well. And I don't care about the order, honestly. Like, usually I go through it so quick the first time. I'm like, okay, is this the industry I like? Then I'll go back again one more time. Like, okay, now I stop at some of the slides and I look at it more closely. But if I go through it once and I'm like, oh, I just don't get it, then I'm just less excited. So I think just making sure it's clear of what you're trying to do is really important.
That's great. And how do you think somebody, in the audience should say, assuming it's early stage, how do you think someone as a first-time entrepreneur going out and raising capital should think about like calculating the amount of money to go raise?
That's extremely difficult, but early on it tends to be labor-based, meaning you need certain action items accomplished in terms of product development or market research, and it's time. So either you're going to be performing those activities or someone else is, and if it's someone else, if they're your friend or someone you know, maybe you convince them to do so for some equity but no cash, but typically there's a cash component. And, Mark made this comment earlier, you start adding heads and then all of a sudden there's real dollars, and it's not just salary, it's taxes and, payroll fees with whatever your sort of payroll provider is. And now all of a sudden it's workers' comp insurance and all the other kind of stuff that California makes you have. And so it gets expensive quick, but it's almost a bottoms up analysis. And I tend to think in terms of tranches or milestones. It's like, how much money is it going to take to get the sort of, the favorite phrase is the MVP or the minimal viable product to a point where it's ready to get tested by our users or customers? How much do I think that's going to take? And if you have no basis and have never done it before, you need to start associating with people that have to get that insight and get that advice, because at least you can get a ballpark. We've seen a lot, and that's one of the things that we'll do is, we'll always ask if it doesn't say in your deck how much you're raising. That's usually one of the first questions. How much are you looking to raise? Why are you looking to raise that amount of money? And you start stress testing that amount. Maybe it's too much, maybe it's too little. Here's a couple things to think about.
Yeah, that's right. And one additional thing that I've noticed in terms of a change in the market trends, and Mark, I don't know if you're seeing this, but I think a couple of years ago, there were a lot more like the 500,000 rounds or pre-seed rounds, which would buy you like a year of runway. That's kind of gone away a bit, because what we found is a lot of those companies are coming back after spending about, say, 10 months, and they have 2 months of runway. They're coming back for additional 500,000 to get them to $1 million. Those bridges are really hard, so I think there are fewer people willing to do the 350 to 500 just to get you into like the initial prototype stage. I'm looking more for folks who are going for like $1 million to $2 million, because I feel like you do need around like 18 months of runway to get there. It's just really hard to get it off the ground. There's just a lot of stuff that you don't anticipate. So that's what I'm looking for. But Mark, I don't know if you see it differently.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think part of it is we're subject to downstream finance too. So if we invest in something, if our small fund doesn't have enough, capital to get that company to the promised land, we will at some point syndicate this with the larger venture capital funds, 98% of which are up in the Bay Area. If we're investing in something that they're not interested in, you got to be careful, which tells you they're somewhat dictating the market. And so if they pull back, there's this sort of ripple effect in the industry. And so these seed rounds or pre-seed rounds, all of a sudden everyone stopped doing it, getting a little gun shy, going, okay, I need to do a bigger round and pull in the bigger funds earlier. And so it changes, but it is a bit of a pendulum. And so you swing from these apexes of, the internet sort of boom bubble periods into complete fear, the sky's falling, you'll never raise another dollar. You just try to have to figure out where you are, which side of the apex, which direction you're going and how fast, and then plan accordingly. But it's people try to put up a scientific formula. It's more, I would argue, much more art than science for earlier stages.
That's awesome. Good feedback.